it isn't about this rate of return. It's about the volume of interest. So when we're looking at that can of peas, it's not the 3 cents that matters. It's how many times we turned that inventory. That is speaking to volume, but we're never taught that in our personal economies. We're just taught, look at the rate of return rather than the volume of interest that is leaving your life every month forever. Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we rethink money, ditch the system, and rediscover what it means to truly thrive well. I'm Trisha Miller, mom of 7, financial coach, and founder of ThriveWell. Around here, we believe wealth is more than numbers. It's about freedom, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts. If you're ready to challenge the norm and take back control of your financial life, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast. Today, we're going to be continuing with our Becoming Your Own Banker series and going through Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. And we're going to get into the grocery store example, which is one of the most educational pieces in this book. In fact, Nelson says that if you understand the grocery store example, the rest of it is easy. So, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to let you start at the top. We're probably going to read this paragraph at a time and have a good discussion along the way.
Sounds good. All right. So the grocery store on page 15. To continue with the imagination exercise, I would like you to examine the process of getting into a business in which you are both a consumer and a seller of the same thing. There's a very significant reason for this exercise, so bear with me. A grocery store will easily meet these qualifications. Everyone consumes groceries and someone has to perform the distribution function. You have an unlimited market. Everyone is a potential customer, as well as you and your family and maybe some other captive customers. Do you want me to stop there?
Yeah. Just because I want to mention that last week we talked about the importance of imagination. So just as a reminder that we're talking about a grocery store, and it's very easy for people to be like, why are we talking about a grocery store when we're talking about the infinite banking concept? Well, this is where Nelson really starts to apply this imaginary piece because he's teaching us the fundamentals of building a business, and in particular, a business where the consumer and the seller, that you're both of those parties, because everyone consumes groceries. So if you are a grocery store owner, you are someone who's consuming the same thing that you're selling. So just wanted to give that caveat before we go on. Go ahead.
You start it all by studying what the grocery business is all about. All the things that are necessary to be successful as an entrepreneur in this field. This is going to take some time and expense. When you feel competent to start the venture, you must now find a good location for the business. The real estate folks say there are 3 important things about real estate: location, location, and location. For such a property, you are going to pay dearly. This is not an overnight activity either. You're going to have to spend some time locating the right place.
Okay. So right off the bat, he's giving us a clue that you start by studying the grocery business. The same is true with the infinite banking concept. If you're going to become your own banker, you must recognize that you are starting a business, and it's going to require your study and attention to learn that business. He's telling you right up front, if you're going to start a grocery store business, you better know what the grocery store business is all about in order to be successful in this field. And this is going to take time. And there is an emphasis here as we go down this list of time. This is not something done overnight. It's also going to take some startup cost. And with the grocery store business, I would say it's going to take a lot of startup cost, far more than it does for becoming your own banker. But nonetheless, don't be surprised that it's going to take some startup cost. Then he goes on to the real estate piece, which is a little shift here. He says the real estate folks say there's 3 important things about real estate: location, location, location. So on the one point, he's saying it's going to be a prime piece of real estate because that's very important. And so therefore it's going to be a very expensive piece of real estate. But I think we could look at this too as a way of saying, when it comes to becoming your own banker, we have to think very carefully about the location of our money. Where is that going specifically? And that can get into the particular type of whole life insurance that we are going to use for the infinite banking concept, because it is very important that it be the proper dividend paying, mutually owned whole life insurance product, specially designed for the infinite banking concept and none other. That is the prime real estate for this business. Any other thoughts on that?
No, I thought you just hit that really well. No, that was good.
Sorry.
No, I think really here is just what the emphasis is that you don't really go into these things just willy-nilly. It takes thought, it takes some time, it takes some learning. I think that was what I raised the book for anybody listening on audio. Right. When Mom mentioned that, you don't just go into the grocery store business, you take the time to learn it. I held up the book because this is your learning the business. It's your, time to look into things and to learn before you do, which is always a good thing.
And I'll tell you, as a practitioner, I see this all the time in my practice. People who study the book and really take the time to investigate it, they run their business better. It's so obvious. And then those who don't, they're just opening up an insurance policy. They're not actually running a business. And what that means is they're not actually practicing the infinite banking concept, and they miss it. And they're therefore not profitable. So take heed. It's important to really understand this. It's a good point.
Moving on. So then you must construct a very nice looking building on the property. It must have a well-arranged interior with attractive equipment and fixtures and display cases. All this is necessary because your competition has been hard at work for years in attracting customers. Customers are going to do business with stores that are convenient, that look good, and that have quality merchandise and low prices. This means that the building, etc., is going to cost you a lot of money.
Okay. So again, high startup cost, making sure we're not just throwing up some janky store, but also I think it relates to a properly structured whole life insurance policy from which you can safely and profitably do your banking business. So I'm not going to go into the details right here, but that means that we need a good solid foundation. We don't want to have a skinny base on that policy that's so skinny that it cannot hold up over time, right? We want it to be something that's going to last. It's going to be good quality. And that means that there's going to be a little bit more startup cost in order to do that. So pretty simple there.
The only thing that I was thinking off of that was just because of like Miller's Bricks, was just there's so much competition, at least in our market, that this is something I'm constantly thinking of is obviously cost. Cost is always going to be number one. But yeah, like, do we look good? Are we convenient? Is it easy? Are we, easy to work with? Like anything like that. And obviously it's a little bit different than the life insurance aspect, but it applies to any business, not just grocery stores
Sure.
This being an analogy, it's just, it's, there's so many factors that you just really have to consider when starting a business. So that's just where my mind went, was immediately thinking about my
that's
own.
a good point, actually, because when you say convenience, then we're not only talking about policy structure being proper, but working with a company that has made it convenient to actually do your banking with. The company I work with has a portal, and you can go in and you can use it almost like an app where you can put in the amount of money you want to borrow against or pay back, making that more convenient. There are companies where that's not possible. And that might not make them a bad company, but you just should be aware of that there's some companies where you actually have to call on the phone and request a policy loan. So it is not the end of the world, but it is a consideration.
Absolutely. I think you told me an example once of, somebody that had heard of the concept and just went to a State Farm guy and was like, hey, can you do this? And it's like, they're not set up for it, to your point, just, being in the right location with the right amenities, so to speak.
Sure. And perhaps then even a practitioner who has the right companies and knows what they're doing with the infinite banking concept would be all a part of that.
Exactly. Cool. Moving on. Now you must stock the store with groceries. The merchandise must be of good quality, attractively displayed, and have competitive prices. Your employees must be attentive to customer needs, courteous and neat. This is going to cost you a lot of money too. You open the front door for customers, they come in and load their carts with groceries and take them by the cashier who collects their money at the front of the store. This is going to leave empty spaces in the display of goods. Your hired help is busy cruising the aisles, noticing where goods have been sold, and quickly going to the storeroom at the back of the store to get more things to fill up those spaces. It is imperative that the store appears fully stocked at any given time. The customers demand it. Have you ever been to a grocery store that was only partially stocked? Did you continue to patronize that store, or did you take your business to another store that was more conscious of this quality?
Okay, I got to stop you here because I can't help but think about Publix.
Yeah.
We have a new Publix that's been built in our town, and we all think that now we have arrived because we have a Publix. And it's interesting when you compare the different grocery stores in town, and Publix can command a high price tag. As much as he says, at a good price. Well, the nicer that grocery store is, the more willing you are to pay their higher prices, whether that's because they take your groceries to the car for you, or it's because they're all very courteous when you come in. It is a rare business today. Can I just say this? With good customer service and people who are neat and tidy and keep the store neat and tidy and everything looking nice. So it is kind of refreshing to go to Publix.
As a former Chick-fil-A employee, no, and I think you bring up a great point there, because that's why Chick-fil-A is just, everybody knows that, right? Like that's what they're known for, is incredible customer service. It's rare to come across these days.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I think too, that came up from my background in the restaurant business. My mother was known as Mrs. Clean. We owned a little drive-in restaurant, although it still had a sit-down dining area. And we had certain white big cloths that had to be steaming hot, wrapped up and folded on every counter all around the building and in the store. And at any given moment, that was to wipe things down all the time. So same kind of idea as this, employee going through the store and making sure there's no gaps on the store shelves. There was no crumbs on our counters ever. Tables were wiped down immediately. Before the people were out the door, someone was at that table washing it down for the next customer coming in. And here's the thing that a lot of people miss. My mother would never allow for there to be any drips or gunk on the trash cans around the place. The trash cans were sparkling clean. So when I read this, that's what I think of. And I think that Publix is one of the few left around where you feel like you walk into a sparkling clean and really efficiently run grocery store. And therefore they get the price. So a better run business, a better price.
I was going to say that perceived quality too, that they, by the quality of the store, by the quality of the employees, etc. You're getting, again, even if it's only subliminally, even if their food's not that much better than the next store, you have this idea of this is a higher quality. And as being somebody now that's very spoiled for grocery store choices, as I've moved into a city that has many more, I know that just off of this example, I'm a much more scrutinous buyer. I'm very picky about what grocery store I go to, and I want only the best, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that perceived quality. So yeah.
And it kind of reminds me when COVID happened and everything was off the shelves too, how janky it all looked. And it was just you knew
something's not right.
Something's not right. You are in crisis here.
Yeah.
The disaster has befallen us because there's not fully stocked shelves.
Yeah. We're so used to it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
All this means that you are going to have to restock the storeroom at other intervals to ensure that you have immediate access to a bountiful supply of goods. The objective of the business is to provide you with income and to build a business that you will eventually sell to someone else to provide you with retirement income.
Okay. Obviously, you even emphasized that with your voice because you knew that was an important sentence. So the whole objective of this business is to provide you with an income and to build a business that you will eventually sell. So I don't know if you're familiar with selling a business, but it's more than just the real estate, right? A business is sold on the basis of how profitable that business is. So if we want to have our objective to be not only to provide us with an income while we have the business, but to build a business that we can eventually sell at a good profit in order to provide us with a retirement income, then we better make sure we have a very profitable business. And so that's a key point here. And when it comes to the infinite banking concept, I think this is where being an honest banker, which we'll get into more, is also very important, because if we want this business to be profitable, we do have to pay back our loans. And that way, when we get to the point of retirement, you don't have so many loans outstanding that there's nothing there for retirement. So it becomes very key to the whole being an honest banker, properly paying yourself back as both a seller and a consumer of the goods. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And also, to liken it to life insurance, you've mentioned this previously, is that the selling the business can also be compared to when you pass and the death benefit that you're going to leave your kids too. You want that to be in as good a standing as you can. And of course, this was designed for a reason to maybe account for some things that you had left over, et cetera. We're not, leave those cases in there. But in general, right, the idea here is you want to create this business, make it as profitable as possible, and then have it in a good standing. So when you would pass it on to those that it's for, besides just yourself, that it's going to do them even better and continues on.
We wanted to have the ability to do both.
Yes, exactly.
And that can only happen if we are good business people with our business. Excellent. Yep. Okay. See what this looks like to be a good business owner now, because it's going to get into this a little bit here.
Once you get this all set up and in operation, the difference between the back door and the front door is a very good living if you can turn the inventory enough times per year. If you sell a can of peas for 60 cents at the front door, you have to replace it at the back door at a cost of 57 cents. I have found this to be a very shocking revelation to most everyone. Grocery stores operate on a very small margin on such items. The can of peas sitting on the shelf for sale represents inventory. You must turn the inventory 15 times just to break even. There is all that interest you must pay on the huge sums of money you've borrowed to buy the land, the building, the signs, advertising, payroll and fringe benefits, utilities, legal fees, accounting, etc., to name a few. Turn it 17 times and you'll be profitable. If you can turn the inventory 20 times per year, you can retire early. Something dramatic happens once you get over the hump.
Okay, so this starts to give you this idea of how much expense you have really incurred just getting all set up. And honestly, I can't imagine starting a grocery store, the expense that this would be. This is why there's not many mom and pop grocery stores anymore today, I think, because you have so much there that you have to put into this upfront. But essentially, he's giving us a clue here that a can of peas, and we're going to talk a lot about this can of peas. The wholesale price is 57 cents. You're selling it at 60 cents. You make 3 cents on that can of peas. That sounds like pittance, and it really kind of is. I remember my father saying in the restaurant business that he only made a little bit of money on the food. A lot of the money was made on the drinks. Soda was cheap. It might cost him a nickel for the soda, maybe 10 cents, but he sold it for 80 cents at the time. You get the idea, right? There was a lot bigger profit margin in the drinks. So you certainly hoped people ordered drinks. And so I'm sure there's a piece of that in the grocery store. Some things are going to be more profitable than others, but a can of peas is what Nelson focuses on purpose, because he wants to show us how this very tiny profit margin is still so very important and can make all the difference. So he mentioned this, the difference between the back door and the front door is a very good living if you can turn the inventory enough times per year. That little if is a big if and a very important one. In other words, you have to be turning that inventory. So if you have a can of peas and you're only making a profit of 3 cents, if you're not turning those cans of peas very often, you're going to go under because it is so little. You've got to spin those cans of peas off that shelf in a hurry. But he goes on to say that you have to turn that inventory 15 times just to break even. Now, I know you had some thoughts earlier as we were talking about the inventory piece that I'd like you to share here. And then I'll talk about the
So
specifics.
For those of you that have stuck along with us for the entire series and have got through my introduction, I work in industrial manufacturing sales. So I work for an industrial distributor. And for us, inventory turn is a very common term of phrase, at least in my understanding in the business world in general. So for us, we have a very, very large inventory. So our goal, I believe, and I'm spitballing these numbers, I think it's somewhere between 4 and 8 inventory turns per year. I think we're actually on the lower end of that right now. But like that's our goal, is because we have such a vast amount of inventory. It's how many times you have to essentially get it into your warehouse, out the front door, and vice versa over and over again, right? In order for you to meet a certain level of profitability. So my understanding, or kind of my assumption when Nelson's reading this, is that maybe he's talking about, oh, the whole entire grocery store, has to turn its inventory 15 times to break even, 17 times to be profitable, 21 times to, retire early, or 20 times to retire early. So that's kind of where my assumption went, was maybe he's talking about the store as a whole, but it could be.
And I'm sure there's truth to that on a macro level, right?
Yeah.
But when I was looking at this, I was also looking at it at the micro level. So just the single can of peas, for instance. So if we know that the profit on a can of peas is 3 cents, and we turn that can of peas, he says 15 times just to break even, he's saying that you need to make 45 cents just to pay the expenses that you've incurred.
Yeah. So it's not even just breaking even on the peas, it's breaking even as a business.
As a business, right? You haven't made a profit yet. Even though you've made 45 cents of profit, theoretically, you're just breaking even with your expenses. So it's not really, the business is not profitable in our little imaginative grocery store world here.
And that might be more what he was getting at, because I think that sounds pretty accurate.
And then we go to 17 cents, and he says, now that you will be profitable. So it's not 17 cents. We go to 17 times and you will be profitable. So 17 times 3 cents is now 51 cents that we've made on our peas. Well, 51 cents is theoretically, according to Nelson, enough to pay all of those expenses and still have a little profit. 6 cents above our expenses. That's right. But it's interesting because he says, if you can turn the inventory 20 times per year, you can retire early. So now he's saying, now you're golden. Why is 20 the magic number? He says something dramatic happens once you get over the hump. And I think the explanation is in this very next paragraph. So maybe you should just go ahead and read this, and then I'll come back to this.
Sounds good. It all reminds me of a phenomenon in physics. Take a pail of water to the seaside. I want you at sea level, and heat it to 210 degrees Fahrenheit, and all you have is very hot water. But if you heat it up to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, you have live steam with unbelievable power. The steam engine changed the world. But it doesn't happen until you get past 212 degrees. Lots of heat goes into the process up to the boiling point, but the dramatic power comes suddenly.
Okay. So why is 20 times per year the magic number that I believe is what he's saying here, is that number that now creates that steam? So you see where he's bringing in a whole new analogy, boiling water, that you've got to a point, you've just got hot water, but you go just that little extra, you get over that hump, and now you've got boiling water. And with that, it's super powerful. You can do all kinds of things. Okay. Create the steam engine, get things really chugging. Okay. Well, 20 times 3 cents is now 60 cents. How much was a can of peas?
60 cents.
Well, wholesale.
Oh, 57. Sorry.
57 cents. So 15 times you had 45 cents. 17 times you had 51 cents. 20 times you now have 60 cents. You have gone over the 57 cent cost. So what I think he's getting at here, and I think that this is an incredibly important revelation for anyone in all kinds of businesses, is that now that can of peas that you only paid 57 cents for has now made enough profit to buy another can of peas. So now you have 2 cans of peas that can be turning and turning and turning. I think that is indicative of the exponential curve. That's where he's wanting our imagination to go, to show how now all you did was put out 57 cents the first time. But now your cans of peas are working for you, buying more cans of peas. So that is where the compounding goes into infinity.
Yep.
And that's why now you can retire early. So how does this apply? Even as I read this as a real estate investor, when I buy a piece of real estate and I have put, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000 down as a down payment, let's just say, and then my property appreciates. Now it's being paid for by the tenants all the time. So it's creating its own little income there, and that's profitable. And it could just keep going that way for a long time and create a little bit of cash flow every single month. And that would be kind of maybe somewhere between the 15 and the 17 cents, right? It's covering expenses. Maybe it's a little bit more. So I'm actually making a profit. But when I can now have the appreciation on the property grow to such an extent that I can borrow against that and go buy another property with $0 of my own because that property has now bought another property, I have an exponential curve. And on it could go. Now, a can of peas is a lot less expensive of an example, but you can take that example and apply that anywhere in between, I believe.
And economies of scale, of course, for the grocery store. So, they're selling thousands of cans of peas.
Your business where you're talking millions of dollars of inventory. Okay, let's now take this to the infinite banking concept. I think what Nelson is getting here is that it isn't about this rate of return. It's about the volume of interest. So when we're looking at that can of peas, it's not the 3 cents that matters. It's how many times we turned that inventory. That is speaking to volume. And that actually takes us back to an episode where we talked about banks being more profitable at low interest rates. And part of that was because not only the numbers that we were talking about, the percentage increase, that was really about the fact that more people would take loans during low interest rates, which meant that they could turn those loans over faster. They could continually lend out more money because at lower rates, you had more people willing to take a loan. So the sheer volume of business being done is where the profits are really at. But we're never taught that in our personal economies. We're just taught constantly, look at the rate of return rather than the volume of interest that is leaving your life every month for years and years and years. Instead of looking at, I've got a mortgage with a 3.25% interest rate. No, I have $1,000 per month, $1,500 per month, leaving my hands forever, leaving my economy forever. But when I am practicing the infinite banking concept, if I am taking over some of those loans, and no, we don't start with mortgages, we start with smaller ones, start where we're at, but that volume of interest starts coming back to us and we can start recapturing that. That is a way of turning the cans of peas and paying ourselves back and doing it again and again and again. And the more we do that, the more we use it. Now we are actually running a business because we're both the seller and the consumer. We're both the banker, the bank owner, and the borrower. We have all of those hats in play, but we must keep that business going. And there's going to come a time when it's not just about taking over debts, but it might be about now, what are the opportunities I have to reinvest that money over here into something else? And so I just wanted to really get across that paragraph is really important. And especially that sentence, if you can turn the inventory enough times per year, you're going into business when you become your own banker. You need to think about it as a business owner, which means that you might need to learn a little bit about business. And Nelson's trying to teach us that right here. It's not about rates of return. It's about the volume. How many times can you turn that inventory? Your company understands that, don't they?
Yeah, I actually think it's so funny that our brains almost went the exact same way with that. Because right at the end of like reading through those last paragraphs, my brain started turning too. And I was like, wait a minute. Nelson's really focused on the inventory turn here versus the profit margin. Like he's not worried about the 3% profit margin. It's
Or the
worried
3 cents.
about,
No, yeah.
Yeah, 3 cents, excuse me. It's about the velocity of money. That's the same point he's getting back here to, is how often can you turn that inventory? How often can you get that money working for you? And then it was funny because then my immediate thought was, well, okay, well, what's the comparable inventory turn for life insurance? And then you pretty much just answered that question by, using our policy and paying ourselves back and cycling that money through ourselves, recapturing that interest, right? That's turning your inventory for your life insurance. And then I kind of had another follow-up thought from that. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think I might have an idea of what it is. What would you say the hump is for getting, like in life insurance? He said, it's about getting over that hump to reach that exponential curve. Is that when your policy the dividends start outweighing or start exceeding your premiums?
I think that would probably be because now it is actually paying for itself, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You're not having
same as the can of peas.
Right. Not that you don't want to put more money into it, because you do want to, because you're going to just go more. But yeah, you wouldn't have to. Becomes a self-sustaining entity that is just growing all on its own. And it's like the tree. Until you cut it down, it's not going to stop growing.
One other thing I kind of noticed as well, and again, this is a grocery store example. It's not a person example. So take this with a grain of salt. So I didn't really notice anything about saving. He's kind of talking about the grocery store using its money, like it's actively using it, right? Do you think there was kind of any purpose in that? Kind of the idea of like, how does this change our idea of like saving versus utilizing our money to make more money, right? Like the idea of making rules of gold to make your money work for you. Do you think, was there anything that, or am I looking into that?
No, I don't know. That's a good question because I never really thought about that, but we talk about capitalizing a system more when we talk about the infinite banking concept than we do savings. Now, in some senses, they're similar, but they're also different because saving is storing money for future use. And it's usually a temporary savings, right? Maybe even if it's 40 years down the road, it's savings is used up. It's gone once it's used. So at some point it's going to be used. Whereas capitalizing the system and borrowing against it, you're never using it all up because it never stops growing because you're not using your money. So it's just thinking in very different terminology, different paradigm entirely. But I think it's a good observation because we're approaching something that we think of as, oh, this is a similar idea to personal finance. And yet it is a little different idea here. And it's applying business principles to our personal lives that we're not accustomed to doing most of the time. Let me put it that way. I don't want to say never, but in general. The other thing I was going to say that struck me here too is there's this idea of use it or lose it. And Nelson gets into this down the road a little further. But if you're not using your whole life insurance policy with the practice of infinite banking, one is a process, one is a product, then you've just got the product. You're not actually conducting a business and you're missing out on the profitability because you're not understanding what you can be doing with those dollars outside of the policy. So see, that's where this imagination becomes really important. So people will sign me up. This sounds like a good idea. Apply, get a policy, and then it sits. That's like setting those cans of peas on the shelf and letting them just get dusty. What's going to happen to that business? Well, it's not even a business. So you're missing out on all the profits because you haven't taken the time to study, to understand, to work the business. There's a working of this business in order to do this. So that's why this imagination is so important. Because when I meet with clients and they want to look at the numbers on the page, on the illustration, but they're not using their imagination and recognizing that that's not all there is to it. That's just the product you're looking at. That's not what you're doing with those numbers. That's not what's happening behind the scenes if you're turning your inventory, if you're using it to your advantage, if you're recapturing interest and getting the bankers out of your life and actually becoming your own banker. I think that might be a good place to stop for today. And we will, the first sentence of the next paragraph says, thus far, the business looks pretty simple. If we can get that much down, we're doing well. But now he's going to complicate the issue just a little bit for us and give us some more to think about. But I think we should tackle that next time. So thank you all so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Until next time, have a great week. Thanks for tuning in to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we're done with the system and we're doing money differently. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and visit us at banklessbydesign.com to learn how you can start living bankless by design.